we saw Marcelino there, who was a illegal crosser himself, and now he merely has 12 restaurants, 3 meat markets, a tortilla factory, and a bakery. On one level, it's clear that through payroll taxes and all kinds of other measures of economic activity, the U.S. came out ahead on Marcelino. But I'm sure there are other ways of looking at that question, and you're going to tell me what they are.
Sure. I mean, first of all, he's a remarkable personality. I mean, any population you take, only a handful of people are going to be entrepreneurs like this who end up opening restaurants and creating jobs and all the rest of it. And, you know, that worked. I mean, that actually worked out. There's no, you don't base policy on anecdote. I mean, the plural of anecdote is not data, I'm afraid. On the other hand, you know, anecdotes do tell you something, and this was actually a very encouraging story about this restaurant owner. Because what's happened is he was hiring illegal immigrants, almost certainly, because it was an easier thing to do. He's not a bad guy, he's just a businessman. That was the environment he was working in, and he, you know, used it. It was easier to hire those people. But when the law changed, he ended up having to be much more careful in whom he hired. And what did he end up doing? In a tighter labor market, he ended up looking at workers and hiring them, people that he would not have considered before. Ex-convicts, people in halfway houses. Those people now have jobs who would not have had jobs before. And let's say that half of them...
from among the hardest to employ in our society.
The hardest to employ, and the ones the employers are least interested in reaching out to. Not because the employers are bad guys, just because that's the way the labor market worked. When the law changed, he reached out to those people. Now, maybe half of them will fulfill the fears that he and other employers might have, that these guys really are going to steal from the till and they're bad guys. But that means the other half, who would also not have gotten employed, who are not, you know, who are redeemable, do want to make a life for themselves, now have an opportunity to get employment that they would not have otherwise. A tight labor market, a labor market where employers have to look for workers and entice them to take jobs, is the best form of social policy.
When you look, Dan, at that story, I mean, you can have set off a cascade of on the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand. What did you see there in Oklahoma?
Well, I saw an encouraging story, and even if he wasn't an immigrant himself, I think that story is replaying over that in a normal economy with jobs growing, it is hard to find workers on the lower end. And I think something's wrong when we've got to go into prisons and hire halfway workers. If half of them don't work out, that is a problem. Employers don't want to gamble where half their employees don't work out. That's a huge cost of business. So what we need is a legal channel for immigrants to come into the country and fill this gap. It's demand and supply. You're right, there's a big disconnect between the politics and the economics of immigration. We've got, over the long run, a mismatch between supply and demand. Continued demand for lower skilled workers, where the pool of Americans who've traditionally filled those jobs continues to shrink. And who's filled the gap? Immigrants. But the problem is we don't let low-skilled immigrants come into the country legally. If you're a computer programmer, you can come in. If you've got some tight family connection, you can come in. But if you're just an honest, hardworking Central American or Mexican and you know there's a job here, you can't come in. And the other issue is it helps when businesses like the hospitality industry, construction, agriculture can hire low-skilled immigrants. That creates more jobs up the spectrum for
managers. But doesn't it also set up a competition between the least skilled native-born Americans, people in status, who want to work? If you look at the patterns of unemployment in the United States, unemployment is highest among those with the least education. It's highest among those with the least skills and job experience. It's highest among people who are early in their working lives as opposed to late in their working lives. Isn't that the pool from which we should be hiring for Chilinos restaurants?
Yes, but they're getting it from all sides. The least of their worries are low-skilled immigrants coming into the country. The reason why they're having a hard time is, one, we've got minimum wage laws that price people out of the labor market. We're becoming a more technological society where skills are rewarded in the marketplace. Studies show that the wage effects on low-skilled workers from immigration is pretty low. And what it does is it reinforces the signal that the best thing you can do for your long-term job prospects in America is stay in school. If you just have a high school degree, no post-secondary education, you'll generally get paid about 38% more than a high school dropout. That's the answer, not going to extraordinary, expensive steps to try to suppress low-skilled immigration. It's to emphasize education, and this is one more reason to stay in school, get your diploma, work on your skills.
Clarissa, what lessons do you take away from the story of Chilinos?
Well, I heard one important thing there. I think everybody's been talking about how there's really high unemployment in the country. And if you look at a period where there's high unemployment, which means that there's a big supply of labor, and he's having a hard time finding workers for his restaurants, then imagine what happens when the economy is booming, right? If he's having a hard time now, what happens then? And so I agree with Dan, that is, right now would be the most propitious moment to look at how we fix our legal immigration system. The systemic failure we're suffering right now has mostly to do with the fact that we have a dysfunctional legal immigration system. But when the economy has been booming, employers and willing workers find a way to meet each other, even if it's illegally. We don't want that. Unfortunately, I think that there's a lot of folks who this issue plays well for their politics and are less interested in solutions and more interested in keeping the problem alive so they can tap a number of fears. The other thing we hear very clearly in Oklahoma, and I had an opportunity to hear Shorty speak on this, is that what we're seeing is a conflation of the anxiety over demographic change in the country. And even though 75% of Latinos are U.S. citizens, Latino has become equivalent with immigrant, with undocumented, and we've heard it in Oklahoma where it's like, we've seen those people move into our neighborhood, you know, we don't want them here. And you're assuming they're undocumented because they're Latino. I heard him from his own words.
Just for the record, Clarissa, Juan, and I all have Social Security numbers.